Yeah, thanks, Paul, thanks for your time this morning. I think this discussion is going to be one that a lot of business owners and small to medium business people are going to find interesting. I think definitely speaking to yourself is going to give a different standpoint on things. I'm sure you, like myself, see a variety of things and have some cool stories to share from over the years. And yeah, really for anyone sort of tuning in and listening to this, we're going to be covering off a range of topics focused on the SME space, particularly around cyber. Paul is the managing director of the Cyber Resilience Centre, which he's going to give a bit of an overview in a moment. From our side, I'm Miles. I'm the technical director at NetSec, and we're a IT managed service provider based in Cardiff. But yeah, over to you, Paul.
Yeah, hi Miles. Paul Peters. I'm a detective superintendent with South Wales Police, but I'm seconded to the Cyber Resilience Centre for Wales, which is a not-for-profit company set up in order to support organisations across Wales improve their cyber resilience. And with that, we have a particular focus on SMEs and micro businesses, and sort of trying to support them moving forward.
Great stuff. And I think let's dive straight in. I think this is probably one of the burning questions a lot of people want the sort of golden bullet answer to, but I'm not sure there's a single one. But what do you think every SME right now should be doing to protect themselves from cyber threats?
So for me, I do have a background in investigating cybercrime, and so often it doesn't matter the size of the organization that's been hit. It comes down to a couple of things. Yes, you do have more sophisticated hacks. However, passwords, it's got to be top of the list. Having a simple, easy to crack password it is a big no-no. It just makes it so easy for the hacker or the criminals to get into your accounts. So having that sort of complex password, the National Cyber Security Centre advise using 3 random words to sort of make it long enough and complex enough, and making sure that you don't use that password for all your accounts, because certainly I've experienced incidents whereby somebody has used the same password for multiple accounts, and that means the hacker, once they broke into the first one, they had access effectively to the others. And the other thing to sort of support passwords is multi-factor authentication. So whether you're using an authenticator app or other method, what it means is that this, as it says, there's 2 methods of authentication needed. So it means if the hacker did crack your password, then they need access maybe to your phone and your authenticator app in order to sort of get into that account. And it's key to sort of, for me, to put multi-factor authentication on any account that's important to you. And I suppose the other thing I do need to cover is recognizing phishing emails. The majority of attacks nowadays probably come in the form of a phishing email. So if you've got staff, employees, also making sure that they're aware of what a phishing email is, what it can look like, and it's not just emails anymore. We've got various types of vishing and smishing and other methods of attacking businesses.
And I think all those things, I think on the surface they seem common sense, right? But I think from my experience in the sort of cyberspace, I think cyber is it's a mindset that people need to develop, I think, and it's having that cyber first mindset rather than cyber last. And I think people often opt for the least path of resistance. You know, they're busy in their everyday lives, or in their work, and they don't want these barriers to entry to be able to do their role. Do you think that from a technology standpoint, these companies can be doing more to make it easier for the user?
I think you can always make it easier, but I think it's for business owners to really understand that that word cyber isn't just for the techies. It's something that they need to embrace. And if I can chuck in a quick war story, Miles. So I remember, I think it was about a year ago, I was up in Wrexham. I was there to deliver an input about cybersecurity to businesses, and I arrived early. When I'm setting up, I had a conversation with a lady that was already in the room working on a laptop, and she said, "What are you here for?" So I said, "I'm here to sort of talk to businesses about how they can improve their cyber resilience and protect themselves from cybercrime." And her response to me was, "I don't do cyber," which struck me as quite a statement, to be honest. So I asked her, is your CRM online? And she said yes. I said, your marketing, do you do that online? And she said yes. Your accountancy package, is that online? Yes. I said, do you use emails? Yes. So I said, well, you are doing cyber then, so you need to learn how to protect yourself. Unfortunately, it didn't have the desired response to the conversation, because she put down a laptop and said, "I'm far too busy for this," and left. But the point I want to make is that so many people think, well, actually, cyber is not something I need to do. That's something for somebody else. But actually, we're all living in a digital age, and we all need to understand that there's simple things that we can do to protect ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that leads nicely on to my next point. It's almost a myth, I guess, amongst the SME space, of that mindset of we're too small to be a target. Do you see that quite often? And how do people change that mindset?
It is, and some of the things that dominated the news in recent weeks, Marks and Spencers and the co-op attacks, and there is a mindset with small businesses that actually it's the big boys in the market that get hit because they've got the money. That's not necessarily the case. I think the fact is that the press aren't going to report a sole trader that's been hit in a small town in Wales. That's not news, but they are being hit, and sort of micro businesses are being hit, and it is a frequent challenge to actually convince businesses, who adopt that mindset of, well, I'm much too small for anybody to target me, and I'm in a small country. Who's going to come and find my business to attack? And it's just not true, because it's the vulnerability that exists that the hackers are looking for. And if those vulnerabilities exist, it doesn't really matter how big or small you are. And I think back to one investigation I led, and the hacker was attacking some big businesses and big organizations throughout the world, but also attacking individuals as well, because the vulnerability exists and he could exploit it. So it really doesn't matter. And I remember a conversation probably a couple of years ago now with a sole trader, and his comment to me was, I'll join your centre because your membership is free. But who's going to attack a one-man band in Carmarthen? Yeah, 3 months later, he contacted me to say he'd been hit with ransomware. So, that's an example of a sole trader that's been hit, and all their sort of files are encrypted, and then reaching out for help. Whereas, they needed to take those simple steps beforehand to protect themselves.
But yeah, I think there's a good point there around that mindset of it. We're too small. I think like how I view it is almost a mind map of when you have that bird's eye view of your business. Yes, you might be a sole trader, but what does your supply chain look like? And a supply chain, then you can sort of look at it as like a mind map or a spider's web of, well, you're reliant on other businesses. Do you have links into that businesses? Do you share information between each other to make your business run? So I think it's that bird's eye view is often a case of, yeah, actually the impact of this could be not from just internally to us, but if we're connected to other businesses and we're passing information, then they could put us at risk and we can also put them at risk. So it's sort of bigger thinking, I think, isn't it? Even if you're small.
Yeah, and I think that supply chain point is really topical at the moment. And what we're seeing is that as a small business, you might not be the attack goal of the criminal. You might be connected to somebody who's connected to their ultimate goal, but they're going to use you and try and compromise you to actually get to their ultimate goal. So the supply chain and protecting your supply chain is definitely something that's particularly topical at the moment.
And you talked about at the start around the education and awareness piece, and I think it's a really important point here that your people can be both your strongest and your weakest link. What can companies do to increase that awareness and continue with that ongoing education without, I guess, getting in the way of everyday business life?
Yeah, I think that awareness piece is critical. You need to make your staff aware, otherwise, how can they protect your organization? And I think that there's so much of our personal lives are digital nowadays as well. So instilling that sort of security mindset, not only not only helps your organization, but it helps those individuals protect themselves as well at home, and sort of trying to instill that in their wider family maybe. So I think it's really important to set time aside to actually revisit, reinforce that sort of awareness message. We see, phishing attacks evolve and get getting more sophisticated. And it's really important that the awareness side of things keeps up with that. And then this obviously content and material that can be distributed, from the Cyber Resilience Centre network or from the National Cybersecurity Centre and this other sort of sources of really good information out there.
I think what we found works really well is as well looking at third-party tools that can incorporate this sort of training into your day-to-day. So some of the tools that we use essentially try and trick users on a daily basis to spot these emails, tell them what's wrong with the email, and then create bespoke training around that. And also as well give the manager visibility of how that user's actually doing, because if we've got particular users who are failing at these tests or these tricks that we're setting on them, then they are high risk users, and that's quite good reporting to go off and assess your risk. So yeah, I think it's nice that technology is being built around that now as well. And in terms of the main thing a lot of people are concerned about is really the cost of all of this. One, the cost to stay protected, but also what is the cost and the downside if it goes wrong. Um, what do you sort of typically see that happens after a breach has happened? What is the sort of typical mindsets you see, and the steps to remediate that?
Yeah, I mean, it very much depends on obviously the size of your organization, but there's no doubt that a cyber attack can be really impactful. So it can impact your business continuity. It can potentially stop you from operating, or it might be that your website is taken down and you don't have the ability to conduct online sales. So operationally, it can be hugely impactful, and you may need to sort of source professional support to come and get you back on your feet. Then if for instance, you hit with something like ransomware, do you have backups? How easy is it to sort of reinstall those backups? I think what we also see is those that manage an attack best or post-attack best are those that are planned for it. So having, cyber in your business continuity plan, having a cyber action plan in place really sort of helps you manage that attack. Financially, there's potentially the ransom that comes with ransomware, or there's the blackmail that comes with a data breach. So those can impact on you. What we say is that just because you pay a ransom, that doesn't mean that the criminal is necessarily going to return your data. So that's all something to sort of take into account. And something that I think often gets missed in these when we talk about sort of cyber attacks is actually the emotional impact. If I've certainly had conversations with family businesses who thought that they might not survive, and emotionally the impact whilst that was going on was quite dramatic. or if you're a larger organization and you're the head of IT, or head of cybersecurity, and it's been a successful attack, all those concerns around what your future is. So it's not just the sort of financial, it's not just the reputational damage that potentially comes, the operational impact. There's also an emotional impact, which is, I think, probably rarely spoken about.
Yeah, and I think what's really difficult sometimes is to quantify, the cost of that. What does that actually look like? And quite recently, actually, I've been working with a business and directly with the business owner, and their mindset. They haven't had cyber support in a long time since they built the business. The business has been going quite a long time now, and they're starting to come around to the idea, but there's still that mindset of, well, if we get breached, we'll deal with it then, and it's fine. Um, and I think that that mindset is quite hard sometimes to change. But I think what those people are not then thinking about is, well, you might be okay losing that data and having to start again. But what happens if your business stops? What if you can't serve your customers? Then the pressure is going to really build up on you, and then you might have a different outlook on it. So I think it's sometimes that scenario-based conversation with individuals who struggle to change is always a good one, because they can actually then apply that to their business and real life, rather than a sort of generic overview of, you're going to have downtime, there's going to be cost.
And I think there's a resource that's available to all businesses called Exercise in a Box, which you can find at the National Cybersecurity Centre's website. And maybe just take one of those simple exercises and then consider what the impact is when you sort of run through it, and that might sort of help that sort of mindset change when you actually realize the potential impact. And even if you have things in place, certainly we as a centre run through some of these exercises regularly, and there's always something you think, yeah, I hadn't actually thought of that. Yeah, let's get that in place. It can be really small things, but ultimately, in the event of an attack, those little small things, suddenly become big things, don't they? So, there's options out there for people to sort of try and understand what the impact would be.
Yeah, and I think it's quite easy for business owners to bury their head in the sand. They're so focused on other things driving the business forward. But how I see it is, when you get that opportunity to actually work on the business rather than in the business, then you can start to incorporate this additional work of understanding the bigger picture. And I think a lot of business owners struggle with that, to take the step back from being in the business. And this is where, part of the strategy of the whole business should be, somewhat centered around cyber, and what we're doing from that perspective, because everyone's, got technology and everyone's at risk. And those sort of threats that, obviously, we've talked around what we can do at the basic level to potentially mitigate those threats. What are the sort of type of threats that you sort of typically see SMEs falling short of and being impacted the most?
So there's ransomware, which is a malware that can encrypt all your files, and then you've got to pay to get the encryption key. There is data breaches, customer data. It can be really valuable. It can, further down the line, it can be sold on to other criminals and used, to perpetrate fraud, for example. And many of these are deployed through phishing. But also, I suppose one of the other key ones is accounts being compromised. Because if I can compromise your business account, obviously I can then attack somebody else potentially purporting to be yourself. So all these are sort of quite regular things we see. And I mentioned earlier about phishing, and you've got, it can be done through text message, or it can be done through a voice call, and somebody pretending to be from Microsoft, for example, saying they need access to your computer. And also we're seeing phishing emails evolve. I think possibly sort of 5 or 6 years ago, a lot of the spam phishing emails were quite easy to spot. and there was grammatical errors. It sometimes didn't make sense, and but now with the advent of artificial intelligence, well, everybody can get these these phishing emails sort of up to a standard where they're quite believable, and it makes it far more difficult to recognize when you're being attacked, which probably means, well, not probably, it does mean that you need to ensure that you've got policies and safeguards in place to make sure that if somebody does make a mistake, that there's a second measure in place. So, for example, have a policy whereby if one of your suppliers emails you to say they want to change their their bank details for payment, contact them, not through that same email, but have a phone call conversation, and just confirm that they are actually changing their account details. So there's things that can be put in place to sort of protect your business or organization.
That's really interesting. And two other things I want to add there. It'd be interesting to see if you see this. Is one, impersonation attacks. So a lot of small businesses now, what I'm finding is their domain is not set up correctly. So we've seen a lot of progress from email providers like Gmail, Yahoo, and now Outlook more recently, increasing their security for email deliverability. So there's three key things there, which businesses need to be aware of, which is DMARC, DKIM, and SPF. And if you're failing those, one is actually counterproductive because the emails are probably landing in junk now. But also, if you don't have those things configured correctly, it's quite easy to impersonate your domain. So from impersonation, what I mean by that is I could pretend to be a business owner and actually send an email from their email address exactly how it is to someone in the business. Like, how scary is that really for a business owner? Have you seen much of that?
Hadn't seen a great deal of it reported, but that certainly doesn't mean it's not going on, because unfortunately, underreporting of cybercrime is significant, and a shame really, because the more policing and law enforcement knows, the more resources can be devoted to it, and the better better the guidance and advice can be shared to protect other people from falling into the same trap. So, and of course there is, when you talk about DMARC, again, the National Cybersecurity Centre offer free tools to businesses to actually check that as well. So that to me is a simple sort of first step that you can take, and is free. It doesn't cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other one as well is, I think business owners almost feel because it's their business, they should be excluded from a lot of these common best practices. And quite often they want to be in a group which doesn't have these stricter policies applied. And I think what they don't realize is they're probably the biggest target. They're the ones who often have the keys to the kingdom. They have the most access to file shares. The list goes on. What can business owners do to sort of mitigate that and view that in a different way? Because that's a real challenge we see at the moment.
I think, I mean, I guess what we're talking about is spear phishing, or whaling, it's sometimes called. I think for me, it's about having an understanding of what information is actually out there on you, because that sort of social engineering side would be the first step to actually crafting that sort of email that's going to sort of fool you. Again, I think ensuring that you keep up with your awareness. It's not just about your staff. And I think critically, putting policies in place, but you as the boss also have to follow those policies. And the reason I say that is I was talking to a sort of managed service provider a little while back, and they couldn't understand why this particularly, it was a small business, I think sort of 4 or 5 employees, got hit with ransomware 3 times over the space of sort of 6 or 7 months. And I think on the 3rd time when they were there sort of installing backups, and talking to somebody on the in the admin team or the admin officer, and it transpired that the owner had instructed that any sort of email that referred to a late payment of invoices were to be addressed, and the invoice was to be opened up immediately, which overruled the general policy of not sort of opening unknown files, and that was. So that was directly led to those ransomwares hitting. So, yeah, it's really important to sort of put the policies in place and be really strong about following them.
Good stuff. And in terms of, let's talk about some of the good things that you guys are doing. I think people need to be more aware of that and the resources available to them. Just talk me through about what the Cyber Resilience Centre offers and some of the quick wins perhaps business owners could come to you guys and take on board.
Yeah, so we offer a free membership. When you sign up for that membership, we try and take you on a journey, very much focused around simple steps you can take. We focus on backups, antivirus, firewalls, phishing, password security. So we take you on that journey. We provide a monthly update where we talk about different things we are seeing and sort of simple measures you can put in place. We ensure it's easy to understand. We try and avoid sort of any sort of technical terms, so everybody can sort of understand the measures that we're suggesting you take. We also have what we call our Cyberpath program, where we've recruited students onto a program, and we use those students properly supervised, but to deliver what I call sort of entry-level cybersecurity services. And because we're using students, it can then be done at quite a discounted rate. And there's things that we would offer would be, for example, vulnerability assessment, or a vulnerability assessment on your website, for example, staff awareness training, and corporate investigation. So basically, to see what information is out there, what can actually be found by the students. So with simple things like that. We also we're out there talking to businesses on a regular basis. If the business groups or events, we're happy to come along to, and again talk about the simple things that can be put in place. And we also work with a couple of organisations to put on what we term incident response events. So you can go along to that. There's an incident exercise that we run through, and then what we do is at the conclusion of the exercise, we go back over it, but with a panel of experts that'll be from incident response, from policing, from insurance, from legal, and also the Information Commissioner's Office. And we would just talk about the different aspects of that attack, and then really try and highlight the sort of support that's out there for organisations should they sort of find themselves in that situation.
That sounds really interesting and probably something I'd like to be a part of at some point, even to listen on. And all that information, can that be found on your website directly, can it?
Yes, yeah. We this I think there's a page on our website about upcoming events. Yeah, and we sort of highlight it there. We'll also push it out on social media as well.
Great. So one of the big problems we're seeing at the moment is the rise of freelance or contractors working for small to medium businesses. Now, I think there's a lot of value to that for many reasons. Obviously, you've got the flexibility around, only paying them when they do the work, etc. You don't really have to give them the benefits. But I think one of the challenges we're seeing is quite often they're using their own laptops, and there's no auditing or compliance around those laptops. Now, I totally get it. If you use a lot of them, issuing laptops with your own controls around them is sometimes costly. If they're not working often or they're swapping and changing when they do work for you, that process becomes a little bit tedious and quite a big overhead to manage. So I think there's a lot we can do around what we sort of typically call BYOD, or bring your own device. But that is a massively overlooked topic, and a big hole that I'm seeing. What can businesses do to, one, safely onboard those users, but also proactively manage that ongoingly as well?
I suppose, firstly, I'd say it's about doing due diligence. Secondly, I think if you, I mean, I'm thinking of some of Cyber Essentials. By completing Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus, where actually somebody else marks your homework rather than you marking your own homework, that sort of focuses on things like not sharing accounts, ensuring you've got appropriate sort of measures in place. So I guess ensuring you're compliant with with a standard like that, I think is important. And taking on board other standards, I guess depending on the size of business you are, but ISO 27001 and standards like that, sort of implementing those into your sort of business model.
I think the good thing around ISO is it covers not just the sort of tech, it's people, processes, and policies, right? So I think what people need to understand is, yes, you can never have the same amount of control over those devices, but what you can do to monitor and understand that is in your hands. And we quite often work with businesses who get us to do monthly audits on a particular sample device. So they will fill in a checklist to say, we have, yes, we have antivirus, yes, we have a
Yeah.
password on our device, those simple things. And that, you can work with an expert to define what that looks like for your business. And then by them answering those questions, you can then almost check their homework to see if they actually have them. And if they don't, then that's a risk analysis to conduct, then, isn't it? If you're happy with that, or if you need to make that a standard and you can't work with us if you don't meet that. So those have been really useful, and I think that ties into a process of onboarding and proactively managing that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Because yeah, if you're relaxing your standards, for contractors or remote workers, you're creating a vulnerability that can be leveraged by criminals ultimately. So yeah, I would totally agree with that comment.
And I think let's finish on, I'm sure what a lot of people would be interested to hear, and I'm sure you've got a few of these from your time at the Cyber Resilience Centre, but um, talk me through one of your sort of horror stories, and what we can learn from that.
So I suppose one that springs to mind was uh, it was a business which was a medium-sized business, and effectively a manager was targeted by the hacker, and they were able to identify the password that they used in their home account, and then they used that on the corporate accounts they had, and yeah, it was the same password. Then all of a sudden they were able to effectively deploy ransomware in that particular incident. But and but I suppose there's another one which I'll say, which is quite worrying in a way, because I received an email out of the blue from a business saying the file I'd asked for was attached. Well, I hadn't had any sort of conversation with that business. They weren't from Wales, so obviously I didn't open that file. But having done a little bit of sort of open source sort of research, it was apparent that that person was a genuine person. It was apparent that the email was almost certainly a genuine email. So, effectively, I concluded that that's an account that's been breached there. So I contacted a colleague who was local to them, another cyber resilience centre, and they contacted them, and at first that organisation point blank refused to accept that there'd been any breach. When my colleague pointed out, well, why are you emailing a superintendent in South Wales with a file? This one was certainly got malicious content then. They ultimately then accepted that there may have been a breach, but ultimately refused to cooperate with police. They didn't want any part of any investigation, and for me, there's a responsibility on that business to inform people that an account has been breached, because how many emails actually went out to their supply chain and wider with that malicious content, and how many people potentially did open that file and did find potentially their accounts compromised. So for me, that the horror story for me is the fact that businesses aren't necessarily accepting what I would term their sort of social responsibility to actually inform when there has been a breach, because by effectively burying their head in the sand and sort of pretending it didn't happen, that's allowing other sort of businesses to potentially fall victim. So that's a snapshot of a couple of stories anyway.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. I think it's always good in some ways to hear the reality, but of course, no one wants that to happen. But yeah, these things are going on every single day. The stats keep getting worse and worse, and what we can do, I guess, protect from that does increase as well. So it's not like we're in a place where we haven't got the tools to fight that. But yeah, interesting to hear from your viewpoint how that was responded to. But yeah, I think that's everything from me. I think that's been really interesting, and yeah, thanks for sort of sharing those experiences and tips and tricks that people I'm sure will benefit from. And yeah, hopefully we'll speak soon.
No, thanks, Miles. My pleasure.